So the final section of this chapter of the textbook on statistics is a variance and standard deviation. The variance combines all the data values in a data set to give a measure of a data spread about its mean. It is a measure of how far on average each data value differs from the mean. When calculating the variance, the differences are squared, which means the units of variance are not the same as the data. Therefore, we calculate the standard deviation as it has the same units. Now, as you can see, we have two formulas, one for the standard deviation and one for the variance. You'll notice variance is just the squared standard deviation, so we can easily convert between the two. Now, the best part of this is you don't really need to use these formulas, as you will be expected to use your calculator to solve them in an exam. The only time you might use them is if you decide to do an IA on statistics, then you would need to calculate them by hand. And just to review there, that the standard deviation shows how much variation there is from the mean. Now here we have some properties of standard deviation. You can read that yourselves, don't need me to do it, to read it out to you really, and if you want to take any extra notes, go for it. So we're going to do an example. So we want to find the mean, variance and standard deviation of this data set 4, 6, 7, 7, 5, 1, 2. So we're going to do this on your calculator, and on your calculator, once again from the menu, you need to go to the spreadsheet and input the data. So you should be pretty good with this by now, because you should have done it a fair bit with your other textbook questions. And we just follow the exact same process as we've done previously. Menu, statistics, stat calculations, one variable, making sure the correct column is entered and the correct results column. So when we get our statistics up here, we have our mean, sum of the x values, the sum of the x values squared. Now, the next two, we have Sx and we have the funky symbol x. They are actually both standard deviation, but one is sample and one is population. We want population, which means we want the second one down. The one with the funky symbol, which we did write before in the notes. So you need to make sure you write the correct one down, because if you write the other one, you will lose marks in your exam. So that is your standard deviation. Mean, nice and easy. We've got the top one here, the x with the line above. That's our mean. Variance, this statistics here does not calculate the variance for you. You need to do that yourself. Now, it's just remembering that it is just the standard deviation squared. So all we need to do is take this number and square it. So the great thing about this spreadsheet is it works like Excel. So what we can do is, in the cell next to the standard deviation, I'm going to type equals. I'm going to select the cell where the standard deviation is, and then I'm going to square it. And that will be our variance. So it's really easy to calculate, so remember from the stats you can find the mean and the standard deviation, and to find the variance, square the standard deviation. So what we found in our calculator was that the mean equaled 4.375. The standard deviation, which remember we can use that symbol, equaled 2.11, and we should probably round our answers to three significant figures, so the mean would be 4.38. Standard deviation rounded would be 2.12, and the variance, which is the standard deviation squared, was equal to 4.484, which would round to 4.48, to three significant figures. Now, last example. So our data set has a mean of 12 and a standard deviation of 2. Each value in the data set has 20 added to it. Find the new mean and standard deviation. And then we're going to do each value in the data set is multiplied by 4, find the new mean and variance. So when we add 20 to each value in the data set, what that actually means is the mean will also add 20. So our mean will be just 12 plus 20, which would be 32. So our new mean would be 32. The standard deviation though won't change, because the variance in values from the mean will still be the same. So the standard deviation will actually stay as is. So the standard deviation will just equal 2. That doesn't change. Now, if we multiply the data set by 4, well, each value in the data set by 4, what will that do to our mean and variance? With the mean, we will actually also multiply by 4. So the mean changes just exactly as the data values do. Now the variance is, remember, the squared of the standard deviation. So our new standard deviation would be 2 times 4, which would be 8. So we multiply the standard deviation by the value. Remember, our variance is the standard deviation squared, so that would just be 64. So what to remember here, if you are adding a set value to every point in the data set, the mean goes up by that value, the standard deviation stays the same. If we are multiplying each value in the data set by a number, both the mean and standard deviation get multiplied by that number. So that is the last of the content for this chapter. So you can now do 6i and 6j, and then when you've done that, I would recommend having a go at the chapter review questions to make sure you are good with all the content we have covered. And finally, if you have any questions, send me an email and I will get back to you as soon as I can. And if I don't speak to you, have a great Easter holidays and I'll see you next term.